frequency.
Well, it was interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with who Dave Bromberg is. He's a legendary. So I was interviewing him recently. We were talking to what?
He played with us back in like 2002.
Oh, really?
Really early on.
He's such an interesting cat. I mean, my goodness. But he was talking to me about the idea of the note, and he said that the most important note to him was actually the break. That it was just as important as anything else of showing the importance of the notes by taking the break.
Right, the spaces. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the hardest parts of figuring out how to, compose music and how to play live music is where do you punctuate with spaces? It's a great observation, and I think a lot of the best music that sticks with us has so much poignant space in it.
Yeah. What about the keyboards? What are you learning about them these days, and maybe musical influences and avenues you're kind of exploring right now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's always important to keep working and to keep learning, different things, and I've always been a big proponent of analog sound. So, I've got a Fender Rhodes and a B3 and a Mini Moog Voyager on tour. I've got a Mellotron M4000D that was kind of a recreation of the Mellotron, and a stage piano. And I see that there's a lot of great things you can do with technology, but for whatever reason, a lot of these sounds you still just can't perfectly replicate with technology. And so, I think that's something that I'm always I'm always seeing out there, and continually reminding myself, oh yeah, that's true. But I do a lot of solo piano stuff when I'm home, and both obviously working on Umphrey stuff and then just playing for the sake of learning new things and just keeping up my interest in solo piano, which is kind of how I got started.
Yeah.
I studied classical music for a long time, and then got a degree in music theory from Notre Dame with a concentration in piano performance. So, as far as classical music goes, Claude Debussy is my favorite composer, so I've always got a few pieces of his that I'm working on. I've recently learned a piece by Dave Grusin from his soundtrack for the movie The Firm, back in 1992 or something, and that's been a lot of fun, kind of coming up with that. So, I think stylistically it's always important to work on different things, try different things, and, you just never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring up your classical training because, as someone myself who works in our scene, it's so interesting that sometimes some people dismiss the scene that aren't in it, but then you talk to them, you're like, well, actually, that person's classically trained and that person's classically trained. and how there's so much beauty and intricacy, but at the same time, I think that also gives you the freedom to do whatever you want within those realms.
Yeah, it's it's interesting because I grew up reading a lot more music than I did playing by ear, and then that kind of gradually switched for me. And so, it's something that I feel like is always applicable to whatever we're doing. And it's not like I'm up on stage thinking about music theory all the time either, but there's so much in there, whether it's interval training or chord voicings and things that I'm probably applying every night when we're up there on stage. So, I think that kind of the concept of the jam scene is a little bit. It's so interesting because it's something that's really embraced by the fans and the people that like the music, and then for those who aren't into it, it's like this huge turn off, and like, oh man, these are people who don't have any taste in music or know what they're doing, and so it's always kind of funny to me that dichotomy of how how it's perceived.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's like there's such a wild variety of styles of people in the scene. Are you talking about electronic music? Are you talking about bluegrass? Are you talking about, for us, obviously, like I said, it's kind of more of a progressive thing. But but that word doesn't really tell you much about what each individual musician or band does.
Well, it's one of those things too, where like people ask me, as a music journalist, like, why do you keep focusing on, why do you keep going to all these shows? And I said, like both sides of the microphone, you are chasing magic.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And there's, there's something that can happen where whatever is outside of that specific concert seems to kind of melt away and fade into the background. And when you get everybody really focused in on the moment and what's happening in that moment, and it's, a musical experience, that's something that brings people together. And I think that's, we're all looking for community out there, community and connection. And it's, even though we're, more technologically connected to each other than we ever have been before, sometimes that comes at the expense of the human connection.
Yeah.
And so that's, to me, especially what the live improvisational scene brings, is this authenticity of something happening in the moment that was only for everybody that was right there at that time.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the thing of community, because I think more than any other band, you guys have such an interesting relationship with your fans, especially on social media. Is that just something that is like you purposely pursue? Because in terms of like Twitter and things like that, you guys are so active with embracing the fans rather than having an at arm's length interaction.
Yeah, well, I'm probably I and Ryan and the band are the two people that are most interactive on that stuff. And for me, it really has been a cool thing to put names to faces, and so it's kind of like it can start on social media, and that can be a thing, but the even more fun part of it is getting to meet people in real life, and then being able to reconnect on jokes or whatever it is that we were talking about on social media. And obviously there's the musical part of that equation where things like events like Bowl, which we just announced our next edition of that's happening, where the fans are really kind of guiding some of the show. So we have an event like that each year where we do that, and then on top of that, obviously there's, like you said, there's just a lot of interaction and jokes, and trying to have fun with music around the music that Umphrey's McGee creates.
Well, my final question is, you've been able to have this career creating and performing music around the world, and you've interacted with people of all walks of life and had all kinds of great adventures through your craft. What does that taught you about what it means to be a human being?
Well, I mean, certainly that we have more in common with each other than not. I think that's one of the really important things, for getting out there in the world, and not just visiting different cities in the U.S., but different places around the world. And music is one of these things that can bring everybody together, whether it has lyrics or not. And so, I think that in the end, that's probably what keeps bringing me back to it. I'm a big sports fan too, but I don't necessarily feel that way when I go to a sporting event. Obviously it's cool if your team wins and you and the fans of that team can celebrate that. But, hopefully when you go to an Umphrey show, you're at a better than 50-50 chance of winning.
Yeah.
Yeah. With live music, you should never have the feeling like you lost the game when you leave, which is something that's a pretty special feeling, that, again, only music can create that.